Hey everyone, yeah, I'm here. I'm just getting a few things done. I just got back in from the field, so it's kind of craziness. So hang tight, I'll be on at 8. All right, all right, all right. Okay, trying to do something new here. And that's to play video and talk at the same time. Looks like it's working. I'm going to play this video just a couple times just to kind of set the mood. It's a lot of retardant. They've gone along and sprayed retardant from the truck water tender onto the sides of the road on Forest Hill Road. This is about 4 miles above Forest Hill. And that's something I do now. I don't know really. To me, this seems kind of crazy to go and paint everything pink with Phos-Chek or retardant. But it's something that they're doing now. I guess retardant companies have to make their money, whether it's dumping it out of planes. If you can't fly the planes, you got to still sell that pink mud. So they've sold us all on spraying pink mud out of water trucks on the side of the road. So this is just kind of our intro video test. So it looks like it's working. So I'll jump in here. Give me 1 second. Swig one more soda. All right, everyone. Hey, welcome to Lookout. Today's the 14th of August. No, Sorry, wrong month. 14th of September. I went up to the Mosquito Fire today and took a look around the north flank of it. I wanted to go see the American fire scar because we've been talking a lot about how these old fire scars might affect the spread of the fire. So I wanted to go see what it looked like. And so I got out there, tied in with a bunch of folks that are right in the middle of it. Spent a little time with the division supervisor for the division that includes the American Fire, the branch director that's running that kind of whole north flank of the fire, and then fire management officer from the Tahoe National Forest, and then he hooked me up with his fuels management officer. So kind of downloaded what they had to say about it, and interview that I shot with the fuels officer out in the burn didn't come out, but the audio did. But I just got in like 20 minutes ago, so I don't have time to fiddle around and all that. But a lot of what I'm doing out on these trips is gathering video and audio for future projects. So it's a good day for that. It's a little hectic to try to do both, but it's worth it. Anyway, if you're just joining us, my name's Zeke Lunder. I run the Lookout. We're based in Chico. We're a wildfire education project, and we run this YouTube channel. We run a website called thelookout.org. And so today we're going to play some videos, but first we're going to start with the map and talk a little bit about what's new. Okay, so I drove up through Forest Hill, up the road here, up past Todd Valley. And so we've got two perimeters on here, and then we've got kind of our progression from the previous days. So the blue on here in the middle of the burn is kind of the first couple days. The yellow, you can tell by the color how much the fire ran on any given day. And then as we mentioned before, we're looking for places where there's new color on the edge. I didn't have time to color them, but here's the two latest perimeters. One from overnight, and the blue one is from 4 p.m., about the time that I was getting out of there today. So had our big run yesterday, came up and burnt right up into Forest Hill. And then overnight, they kind of fired and held this flank here. So this is all, I think, pretty much tied in. I don't know what's going on down on this flank, if they've got handline or, I'm not really informed on what's happening. But from last night until this afternoon, they've kind of continued to bring fire down this ridge. It's showing no new spread over on this other side since last night. And last night, the infrared came in right when we were on our broadcast, so about 7 p.m. So showing no new spread on the El Dorado side of the fire, a little bit of new spread down this ridge. But this is all pretty much intended firing that they held overnight. So when I drove through here today, things are really mellow. Not a lot of kind of crisis going on. It's hard to imagine, actually, that 24 hours ago there was the firefight going on. So don't have a lot to report other than things seem pretty tranquil. And talking to the folks that I talked to, this was a lot of firefighting. The fuels guy that I spent an hour with, he said, he worked all day yesterday. He lives right here in Forest Hill. He went home and went straight into a crazy firefight in the backyard of his place until the middle of the night, and then he slept a couple hours and then he went back to work. So, and he didn't tell me that till the very end. We hung out and had this conversation, and then I didn't stop to think that maybe he lived in Forest Hill. So that was kind of remarkable, just that, nonchalant. Oh yeah, like last night I stayed up most of the night and saved my house, and every night I've been going home and there's just dozers and crews like working out right off my back deck, and I'm sleeping. Anyway, people are doing some pretty, the locals here, the local Forest Service people, they're in it. They're so in it. And, hey, there I am. Okay. Anyway, wow. So I drove up through Forest Hill, up the road here. Nothing new happening on this flank really until you get up to right here. And then what's pretty remarkable to me is that they fired this whole flank in the last, since last night. So I was just going to measure that because this fire's so big that it's hard to get your head wrapped around it until you're out there, and then you look and you see like fire way off on the horizon on the other side of it. So yeah, so they fired like 4.5 miles last night along the road. And basically what they're doing here is they're just trying to kind of create a buffer. The fire's well established out in here, and they're working on creating a buffer. So we talked a little bit yesterday just about how even in the middle of, a drought, and a week after we had a fire that, burned 10,000 plus acres in, a couple of hours, some places out here, they can't even get it to light, right? So, and that's the problem, because fire is kind of our best tool for establishing a fire break that's wide enough to deal with, here we got a fire that's spotting, a quarter mile this afternoon. So if this fire kind of does end up pushing on this line, we need this line to be, deep enough. Like, we need the line to be wider than this spotting distance, or we need to be prepared to try to pick up spots, which I'll show you in a minute isn't easy in this country. So they're firing this, and what does that mean? Let's just look at a video of what firing looks like, what the result looks like. And I've got like a whole bunch of videos here open, so I'm just going to have to kind of guess. I think it's the last one I shot. So, nope. Second to last one. Okay, so this is right off Forest Hill Road. This is what the firing looks like. Basically, they're laying fire on the ground. It's consuming the pine needles, some small sticks. It's not really going up into the larger trees at all. It's not consuming all the brush, but it is consuming most of the stuff that's smaller than, like 5 inches, 4 inches. I don't know. Smaller stuff. So also crews are coming in here, and there's a lot of brush stacked on the other side of the road. They're kind of whacking the brush right by the road, and then they're firing this. So when you see that squiggly line of firing on the map, basically that's what we're looking at here. So that was kind of right out in here along the road. I got one other video of that, I think. And so it's difficult because we need good consumption on our firing, as we talked about. And they're getting it in the timber, but they're not getting it in the brush. So, good consumption. You can tell by the white ash. And so today there was dozens of fire engines out here, and they're mopping up this edge. But you can see right out in here, there's like bunches of dry grass that didn't burn. So it's what we call, dirty burn. Just have to throw this in there because this is what the landscape looks like. There's a neighborhood right here, and it's surrounded by this. Sorry for the shakiness. But like, this is sick forest, people. Like, this forest is so thick that either it's going to burn to a crisp, or beetles are going to come and kill 2/3 of the trees, just because there's way too many trees here. And the fuels management officer I talked to today said basically what happened was they had the Volcano fire in the 1960s, and then they planted a ton of trees after that, over thousands and thousands of acres. And they planted them at a really high density because they were afraid a lot of them wouldn't survive. And then like 95% of them survived. And so if you don't thin that, then it just turns into this crazy sick city forest. And there's nothing, there's not a lot you can do with some of these. You can get a little bit of wood out of some of these trees, but it's just, it's hard to get rid of small trees when they get this big. So the best time to get rid of trees to keep them from becoming a thicket is when they're the size of, below your knee, and you just walk around and whack them with an axe or a hoe or something. But when they get big, they're every year that you leave trees too thick, they get harder and harder to deal with. So, anyway, this is right above Forest Hill, and I just can't believe how productive the land is here and just how much vegetation there is. And it's so hard to deal with this amount of vegetation. Anyway, in the timber, they've been able to get decent underburn done. So that story changes when they get to the brush. So here's what's interesting here on this burning operation, you'll see, which is now extended. They started this operation way down here, right? So they've fired, over the past week, they've fired Well, he said this is 4.5 miles, so there's 9 miles. They fired like probably over 15 miles and held this edge. And now they stopped when I got to the American Fire. And it's not that they don't think the fire is gonna, not that they don't think that they need to finish this box. The problem is that they can't fire this brush out here. So you can see, like, as soon as you get to the American Fire, you just have like a huge amount of brush. This all burned hot. It got salvage logged, and there's just a ton of brush. And that brush looks like this. So here's a dozer line along the edge of Forest Hill Road in that burn scar, and now in the brush fields. So today I was glad I had a long sleeve shirt. It's cold up there. Well, I mean, cold by after, you know, considering a week ago it was 105. Up there it was like 64 degrees and breezy and kind of a little humid under the smoke. So we've got this brush field. Oh, got a call. Can't take it. Okay. So we got this brush field and you can't really burn it. Like, so I'm going to, we'll have some video of why that's the case, but basically it's green brush and brush when it's young, it doesn't have a lot of dead twigs in it. So this burn, it was kind of burned down to nothing, right? And then they salvage logged it and they probably, bulldozed the brush that was left. So you've got this brush here that, let's jump to the next video. So I continued up Forest Hill Road along the burn. I just kind of want to see the range of conditions out here in the fire. And there's masticators out there, and they're grinding the brush along the road. So let's see, this is a little farther down. These are people patrolling in the area that did get prepped, or that actually got burned. So, okay, so here we're at the brush field, and I'm going to talk a little. 4 or 5 feet, 6 feet tall some places, on the edge of the American Fire scar. We've been talking about the American Fire on the broadcast here, about how this almost 10-year-old burn might affect the spread of this fire. So I'm just standing on a log here, but you can see out behind me that the brush is like 4 or 5 feet, 6 feet tall some places. And then underneath the brush, there's some sticks and twigs, and it's, this area got salvage logged, and then they planted some baby trees. So you can see over here, some little trees. But really, there's not a lot of dead material in this brush. There's not a lot of carrier fire. And so today it's kind of cool. It's like, 68 degrees right now. And the team is kind of frustrated a little that it's not hotter and drier, because they want to be able to burn this out. Because right over there is Forest Hill Road. And this is critical that the fire doesn't cross Forest Hill Road. So right now the fire really is slowed down in American, and it's being mainly driven by the terrain and where there's wind blowing up the slope. So they're kind of, this is one of those places where sometimes the fuel loading, you wish it was more, because you need it to burn to get black around this. They've got a ton of firing coming up the road here, and a ton of progress in the timber where they have litter to burn and can actually get the fire to carry. But as far as trying to get this to burn here with people on foot or anything else, it's tough to get this to burn. So until it's windy, hot, and dry, and then it burns out of control. So, looking at the map here of the American Fire, this is we're going to drive around and get you a couple examples of what conditions look like in the American Fire burn scar in the brush and regrowth. Yeah, so that was taken right in here, kind of like within the first half mile where they stopped firing, but they just can't get this to burn. And it was the same thing last year during the Dixie Fire in the old Reading Fire scar on the north end of Lassen Park. They just, they couldn't get it to burn. And then, so I know it's just kind of counterintuitive that during a big forest fire that your biggest problem is you can't get something to burn, but that's what's happening. So they're kind of stalled here. And, this will burn with some wind on it, but we don't want to burn this with wind on it, because then it's going to spot over. And when we talk about it getting into the North Fork American, like, that's everyone's nightmare. This is steep, inaccessible ground, and then it just opens up a whole nother front in the fire. So that's the big puzzle right now. It's like, how likely is the fire going to get up to here? You know, right now I think what they might be doing is carrying fire down this deadwood road and then see if this just goes out, you know, like, because there's potential that this fire is really just going to slow up and not spread in America. And so if they can fire out this little finger and be done with this part and not be worried about the fire pushing out into here, there's, you know, if the weather, it really depends on the weather, but the fire may just kind of hang up in here and skunk around. Like that's what happened on Dixie. So it's a puzzle, you know. So the next little video I'm going to show is of a plantation in this area. And I think that really helps to visualize what conditions are like in the King Fire, where they slicked off all the private timberland and then planted little baby trees. All right. That's their only business, really, is to grow. American fire, right? Still in the American fire scar here. This is an area that was salvage logged and then cleaned up, and they planted trees in here, little baby pine trees, and they sprayed herbicide to kill the brush. And the trees are about 8 feet tall, and there's really not a lot of fuel on the ground out here. So I think that parts of the King Fire that got salvaged, a lot of it probably looks a lot like this. So when we're talking about the fire hazard in these older burn scars, especially ones that have been heavily managed for timber to restore commercial forests, without wind in here, fire's really not going to spread. A lot of wind. They're gonna have to come in here and thin these trees, usually when they're like, you know, maybe 12 to 15 years old, because they're planted, you know, like 8 feet apart or something. There's a really tight spacing. So after they do that, there'll be some slash. There'll be some like red pine needle slash, and the brush may have grown up a bit by then. So, you know, over time, these burns lose some of their kind of fuel break status, but it changes depending on whether or not they've cleaned up and done replanting. And most of the private timberlands, they're really a lot more aggressive about that cleanup and planting, because that's their only business, really, is to grow trees. All right, so that was kind of right out in here. Out in here, I think, where they've replanted. So next shot, I went down into kind of a spot where there's kind of a draw and some older forest down in here. And I think the point of kind of this variety show here is just that there's a lot of forest that remains after the American. I mean, a large proportion of the American did burn hot and got salvage logged, and we've got patches of brush. But we've also got a lot of fire resilient forests in here now, because once a forest survives a decently hot fire, it's kind of reset back. You know, we tend to think of these areas that haven't had fire. You know, there's a lot of areas out here that haven't had fire for 100 years, and we tend to think that, oh man, unless we get in there and thin those, like they're just going to get toasted. And so the fire came through here and it thinned a lot of these lands, and yeah, it's pretty severe. A lot of this big brush patches and stuff. But now you got this kind of some area where large trees survived, and we can have another fire that could burn through here and not kill those trees. And so in a lot of ways, these big fires, even though they're more severe than we want, are kind of a climate reset, where the forest is kind of resetting itself to the new climate reality. So jump to the next video, which is in an area that's got kind of some bigger trees that survived the last fire. And you guys can see how poorly I shaved last night, every little hair, huh? All right, so we're still in the American fire here, and this area had a good burn in 2013. You can see all the big trees survived, and that's kind of the luck of the draw with these bigger fires. It just depends on when they burn during the day and what the weather conditions are like. Did it burn at night? You know, maybe as part of a firing operation. Well, likely it was. You know, a lot of factors affect how it burns. So when we look at this side of the road, you can see scorch marks going up some of these trees, like, you know, 40 feet. And then you see also this natural regeneration in here. Maybe they planted a few trees in the openings, but then there's just a lot of natural trees coming in. A lot of like pine trees, they like bare soil to regenerate, to germinate. And so often after fire, you see a big flush of pine regeneration. So as far as maintaining a healthy forest, if we get a fire through here right now, even on a pretty severe condition, because the previous fire killed the smaller trees and a lot of those branches are kind of down, and you've got a long ways up to the live crown of these trees, even with a pretty intense burn in here right now, a lot of these big trees are going to survive. And that's because these forests have evolved with a frequent fire. And so being, 9 or 10 years out from the last burn, it's about the perfect time for this to burn again, either with prescribed fire or in a wildfire. So one thing that happens is that the trees survive during wildfires often will survive a subsequent fire if it happens soon enough. If we wait 30 years and this burns again, these small trees here will have grown up enough that they can carry fire into the bigger trees. But right now, if we had a fire and we killed all these small trees in here, likely the pines, some of the pines that are like 8 feet tall would survive, but a lot of the 2 or 3 foot tall ones wouldn't. And that would be a good thing. Our forests are overcrowded because every time we put out fires, we keep fire from pruning stuff like this that is too thick. Like right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees in like 5 feet. So if all those trees grow up, right here you're looking at as a future thicket. And the problem is that all of our forests look like this because either after logging or after fires, we've had a lot of regeneration with all the soil disturbance, and then nothing to prune it. So forests get thinned by fire. They get pruned, they get weeded. These are weeds. All these little baby trees, they're weeds. And so this forest needs weeding, and fire's gonna do it. So if the fire that we're on right now, the mosquito fire, actually does burn through the mosquito fire, odds are the majority of the ecological effects are gonna be beneficial. But on, in a kind of more of a management sense, if you tried to come in here and burn out right now to control this fire, there's hardly any fuel on the ground and it's not dry enough. You wouldn't really get the fire intensity you need to kill these little baby trees. So it's kind of this thing maybe that doesn't come right to people's mind, is that even when we've got a big fire burning and people evacuated, that the conditions on the ground might not even be conducive to getting a fire that's hot enough in some places to even achieve control. Like if we wanted to fire this road right now, today at this time, it'd be difficult to put enough fire on the ground to consume enough fuel to actually get a nice solid black line along the edge of this fire. So just more variety in the American burn.
All right, I think we already watched that one. What we got left? So I ran into Brian Crawford. So he's in charge of, he's the fuels management officer for this district. And so, and maybe for the whole Tahoe forest, but his job basically is to manage this, this landscape. Fuels program means in the past, the fuels program was mainly like, hey, let's get rid of all this slash after we log. And so for years, the Forest Service was mainly focused on managing all the dead branches and tops because they were really in the business of taking out the big trees. But that's kind of evolved now, where fuels is a lot more oriented around community safety and some prescribed fire. So we talked for a long time. The part that I wanted most of him talking about how this brush is going to reburn, like I said, I didn't press the button far enough or something. So, but basically what he said was the same thing that we were talking about, is just that with wind on this, and if this had been a week ago, this would rip because there's enough dead logs and branches and stuff that with wind this will rip. But right now it won't, and that's a problem. And that we just we don't really know what's going to happen here with the fire pushing this way, and also that even though retardant works really well for kind of penetrating down in here, not getting stuck. You drop retardant on the canopy of the forest, and a lot of the retardant just ends up in the trees, not on the ground. So out here, at least it all ends up on the ground, but it's been so smoky that you can't fly anyway. So that's kind of the catch-22, is that even though retardant's going to work well in these brush fields, we can't fly until the air clears out, and then when the air clears out, the fire blows up. So, American fire is just a puzzle. And let's see what he has to say here. I think it's a little too quiet. Who have that expertise, and we're not doing enough.
For a little over 2 decades, and ever since I started in the Front Range.
Yeah, so you'll have to just watch some future videos of him if you want to actually be able to hear what he's saying. But really appreciated his time and appreciated his boss, Jess, for hooking us up. And then just driving out, this is rocking up. KVMR in Nevada City is the best thing about working in Central Sierra. So this is kind of the non-glamorous part of firefighting that people don't see. The media wants to catch the guys with the big flames. This is wildland firefighting. Is you're out like stirring ash and squirting water on the side of the road for days, mopping up every little spot. And whistling. Sorry about that. That's bad whistling. So yep. So one thing we talked about, Brian and I, is just that there's a huge amount of resources on this part of the fire, and that's what it takes to control, to put in line and fire and hold it. Easily $500,000 worth of people and equipment that I drove past between Forest Hill and Deadwood Road. And Brian and I were just talking about like, hey Brian, what would you do if I gave you $500,000 a day to do your work, to actually when it's not on fire? And we were talking about what it would take to do large scale burns. And what it's going to take for us to do large scale landscape burns is like helicopters and bulldozers and crews and maybe even air tankers, and right now, if you have a burn, no one's going to burn under conditions where they think they need an air tanker. But a lot of this stuff, a lot of the burns that need to get done, like we're going to have mixed severity. We want to kill trees with prescribed fire because we got way too many trees out there. And we're going to need to use, we're going to need to burn under more edgy conditions. Right now, everyone's tolerance for risk is so low that we end up burning in really narrow windows. And often it's not severe enough conditions to actually achieve the objectives, which would be to kill a lot of trees with prescribed fire. And so in the future that I'd like to imagine, as a burn boss, I'd have access to a VLAT. I'd have access to some Type 1 helicopters that cost $50,000 an hour because we're perfectly willing to do it on days when we have fires that are destroying every tree. We don't, no one bats an eye. If I'm an initial attack IC on a fire and I order up $500,000 of retardant in the first 3 hours, no one bats an eye. My boss isn't going to call me and say, "Hey man, why'd you spend $500,000 on mud today?" But if I'm on a prescribed burn and I lose it, and they have to spend $500,000 on retardant, like I'm going to lose my job. I'll never be able to burn in this state again. So our priorities, if we want to actually get good with fire, our priorities have to shift, and our understanding of risk has to shift. And both the guys I talked to on the ground today who work on this forest are prescribed fire, qualified firing, prescribed fire bosses. And it's just, we're not going to get it done with small projects. And big projects require a lot of money, a lot of resources. We don't have any problem mustering those resources right now. And having, 1,000 people out here mopping up what's basically a prescribed fire. So that's the only way we're going to get ahead of it and make any sort of change in the landscape scale risk is large projects and massive investment. And no one thinks for a second about spending $1 billion on prescribed fire, which would only be like, a third of the Forest Service fire budget. So anyway, I enjoyed talking with these guys. Brian Crawford, Eric Hussman. Enjoyed talking to the division. Jamie Hidalgo. That's what I love about fire. Great people working out there who care a lot about the land that they're managing. Share a lot of the frustrations. Okay, what are we gonna do? Close this video. All right, that's about all I have to report. Someone asked why we don't have the Ralston fire on here or the star. So I'll pull those up. The reason is basically because we were just interested in 10-year-old fires. And here we go, California fire history. So here's all the fires. And we talked about earlier how all these trees out here were planted after Mosquito Fire, or the Volcano Fire, sorry. Can't really see it very well, but we'll put an outline around it. Making it think hard, I get frustrated with my computer. Sorry, map's not on. You can see my wheel of death. I get frustrated with my computer, and then I'm like, oh, I just asked it to count like 1 billion points on the map. Okay, so we're just to show the Volcano Fire here. It's got a black outline around it now, so it basically burned from Volcanoville all the way up to the North Fork of the American. And that's where they planted all these baby trees, and that's why we have such thickets here. So it's kind of a similar story, and it's a cautionary story, like, hey, next time you have a big fire, don't plant trees on 10-foot spacing unless you really think that you're going to be able to come back and thin them. That's the problem. It's just like we throw all these trees in the ground, and then we never come back and maintain what we did. And it's the same with fuel breaks and thinning projects. We spend millions of dollars cutting brush, but we don't budget any money to come back and actually cut the brush that's going to sprout after that. So here's the Star Fire that someone asked about, which burned in 2001, 21-year-old burn. Here's the Ralston. Oh, it's deadwood. There's another one here, Ralston, that this fire's now burned through. But yeah, we tend to show newer ones because it's not clear that how much benefit a 20-year-old burn scar is going to buy us. But it is significant, like something has happened out there, right? Compared to these other areas out here that haven't had fire in 100 years. The other thing that was cool about talking to these two guys today was, I a couple nights ago, I went out on a limb and it's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. This forest hasn't burned for 100 years, and if it burns, it's our fault because we haven't managed it. Well, it turns out that the two guys I was hanging out with in the woods today are the guys that have basically been like in charge of doing all the work that I said wasn't happening. So that was kind of fun to actually just get to apologize to them in person for saying, hey, oh, by the way. And they weren't too bothered. So that's cool. Anyway, so many layers. I'm just endlessly confused by all this. Options everywhere. Anyway, here's the Big Trees Grove. This pink burned in 24, but we haven't had a big fire in here. So what they said, learned quite a bit about the Big Trees Grove. And if I can turn off some of these other layers, that might make it easier. Okay. Turns out that the Big Trees Grove itself is like 4 acres of the core grove, and there's only 7 big trees. So I can see why people are worried about them. And they went in there and also there's 2 spotted owl protected activity centers in this area, which means that there's kind of limited periods when you can actually work during the year because you can't work when the owls are nesting. And also this is a designated botanical reserve, so you can't use mechanical equipment. So basically the only options they have for doing anything in here is thin by hand and make piles by hand and burn them. So they thinned trees in the core grove that were under 6 inches in diameter, which is pretty small severity because it was so thick. And then they came in again and they killed a lot of the trees, the small trees. And so they burned in 2018, they burned 180 acres with a kind of a drier prescription. The first year it was moist and they just kind of barely got it to burn. So their plan, if the fire doesn't burn through there, is to get back in there in 2024. But they aren't super keen to put fire on the ground right now because there's some big snags that are adjacent to the big trees, and they want to have time to prep lying around the snags because they're afraid if they go and put fire out here preemptively to kind of backfire into it before the fire gets there, that if the fire gets in those snags, then those snags will fall over onto the big trees and spread fire into them. So that was what they said. Okay, so I'm going to get to questions. Okay, Erica is on it. My wife Erica is helping out. Thanks a lot, darling. Why would you choose retardant drops over water? What are the long-term effects of the red mud? Retardant is like this nice slippery mud, real fine, and it coats the vegetation, and that reduces the flammability, and it stays on there until it rains, basically. So it just kind of, the pink just kind of coats it, and it's called long-term retardant. So it can stay, viable for months as far as reducing the flammability. So it's like if you think of just taking a bush and dipping it in mud and then trying to light it, that's basically what retardant's doing. The long-term effects of the mud on vegetation are not anything that I know of. I don't think it kills vegetation or anything. The main problem with retardant is that it's aquatic toxin, so it kills fish. And so that's why I worry about us spraying it out of water trucks onto the side of the road, because you got ditches on the side of the road. And depending on where you are, those ditches, when you have a big storm, they run as little creeks into big creeks. So when I see that we're just spraying this pink mud that's a toxic to aquatic life onto places like ditches that are going to run into our rivers, I don't love that. Will the mosquito burn scar put Quintet, Georgetown at more risk for future fires because there's less fuel surrounding the area, therefore less of a buffer zone, or will it help prevent future damage? Says Mystic Statistic, and the first person was Dense Alicon. It's all kind of just like this moving through time and space question. So you're asking about Quintet, and Quintet's over here, and just going to turn on place names. I don't know why it's not turning that on, but anyway, Quintet's out in here. Will it make it better or worse? Depends a lot on like how hot did the fire burn, etc. So answer to your question is yes. And yes, everywhere is at risk of a future fire. Fire gives us an opportunity, and we can come back like in the American fire and burn it again, and kind of try to reestablish a natural fire return interval. Or we can leave it alone and it'll get all choked with brush and baby trees, and then it'll be a big hazard, and then the next fire will kill all those beautiful big trees that have survived the last fire. Wigren, sorry. And yeah, this is new growth here, out here. And to me that looks like a firing operation. There's like kind of a little logging road here. And so yes, the fire is getting closer, but it's because we're putting fire on the ground. So they don't really want the fire to be able to kind of bubble up out of here and not have done anything to contain it. So they're carrying fire out on this flank through these clear cuts, which I'm pretty sure timber company's not happy about. But on the other hand, it'll be really interesting to come out here and see if it was actually beneficial. Like, are they going to get good fire effects? The timber companies are terrified of liability of prescribed fire, but when you look at SPI's ownership, it all looks like this. They've got 1 million acres in California, and it's like half new clear cuts and half stands that haven't been clear cut yet that will be. So if there's anyone in the state that needs to figure out how to use fire at the landscape scale to manage their fuels, it's Sierra Pacific Industries. And right now the liability is such that they're not going to do it. They're hardly burning anything. They're hardly burning slash. But when we talk about burning at landscape scale, it's not going to be possible unless we get the major timber landowners on board, and that's going to involve lots of lawyers and laws changing. Because for now, they know that if they start a fire and it gets away and burns on a national forest, they're going to have to pay triple the value of the standing timber as in penalties, and that quickly adds up to tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Anyway, hopefully be great to get out and see what kind of fire effects we're getting burning through SPI's clear cuts. So yeah, it's getting closer there, but the good news is that this is now this is a controlled situation. They're doing it on purpose. They're going to tie it into the King Fire scar here. And as we've been saying, you know, the problem with these fire scars is they're going to help us out a lot under this cool weather, and then but that we can't really use fire the way we want to unless the conditions get drier and windier. All right, if I mentioned Hellhole Reservoir, Corey Kilpack's going to make a donation immediately. Here's Hellhole right here, and French Meadows. So there you go. Anyone else want some shout out to their favorite place? We already talked about the burn scars. NorCal MTB, thanks for asking. Katie Markov donated $10. Thank you, Katie. Daniel Swain's forecasting significant wind event on Saturday before possibility of rain Sunday, Monday, says Norm Anderson. I wonder what direction he's saying it's going to come from. You know, one thing about a one-day wind event is there's only so far the fire can go. So, you know, say we get a one-day wind event in the American fire, even with a strong wind, it's not likely that we're going to burn the entire scar here in a single day. And so I worry more about the 3-day, the 4-day fire wind event. But coming back to like talking about firing, we talked a little bit about like when you put fire on the ground, say your fire's here and you put fire on the ground 2 miles out, and then you get a wind event and it blows your fire 4 miles. You've moved and if you hadn't done anything and just left the fire here, the fire would have been 4 miles. So you just gave the fire 2 extra mile head start. So, well, Dr. Swain's a pretty smart guy. So he knows a lot more about the weather than I do. So hopefully the wind event comes from a direction that is beneficial for us, which would pretty much be like not from the south, because we don't want the fire to go over here. And this is all looking really good. I think the sketchiest part right now is just that they hold on to this bottom part around Todd Valley. So hopefully we don't get a big east wind. The fire guys I talked to in the field today said that for them it's more about the north wind. So I'm just going to shift around here with north up, and north wind would be blowing the fire this way, which could be a problem down for going through here, except that we feel like the King Fire scar is a decent barrier. So I guess I'm not super concerned about a one-day wind event as long as it's not blasting straight down the canyon here and pushing all this. But by Saturday, they'll have had quite a bit of time to kind of really knock this out. So curious what what their plan is to tie this down, but have to see. What would it take for the Mosquito to make it to Truckee? We talked about this last couple of days. Let me break out my tape measure here. Here's Truckee up here. A couple of days ago, the fire was 35 miles away from Truckee. Now, okay, it's 30 miles away from Truckee, basically. And as we noted yesterday was a pretty big growth day, and the fire grew like 1.5 miles. So at that rate, with big, steady growth days every day, it would take 20 days of those to get to Truckee under the current rate. So, and like I said before, I'm not laying odds on any of that. Like I don't want to go there. But I'll just say, that King Fire ran 15 miles in a day, and then it petered out. So the American fire here, under current conditions, it would take more than 1 day of big spread to actually push through this, I'm pretty sure. So Matthew Peck asked about what it would take to go to Truckee. It'd take a lot. So I think just keep watching each day how much it spreads. And like we've said before, the difference between the King Fire, which ran 15 miles in a day, and this fire is that we've got fire scars from the last 20 years in front of it, where the King Fire had none of that. So it's kind of we can't really compare the two for their potential. What's reburn mean, and how does it happen? Reburn is when you have something that like you do a firing operation and you put down a fire on the ground, and maybe it doesn't burn all the way down to white ash. Maybe it just kind of burns the fluffy pine needles off the surface, but you've got kind of packed down pine needles below that. And then you get a big wind or a dry period, and the fire can actually burn back across that stuff that was black. And so some fuel types, it's worse than others. Like I've seen some reburn in thick live oak leaves that were really frightening, where it just, because we think of the black as being our safe zone in firefighters, and it's like, okay, if something happens, jump into black, and then suddenly the black is just like this broiling red, dark, smoky flame as you get some wind on something that you thought was already consumed. So reburn, it's depends a lot on the fuel type. A lot of the stuff that they fired now, basically what they did is they kind of dried out the canopy. And so let me jump back to the video of the firing operation out in here. Take a minute, sorry. These windows don't like to cooperate with me. Okay, so as far as reburn, like what we might be concerned about on the north flank of the fire in this firing operation is we're not going to have, the ground isn't going to reburn here because we burned all these fuels up. But basically what we did with this understory burn is we really dried out the canopy here. And the canopy's dense. So if we were to get a big wind-driven crown fire in here, that could be a problem. Because the canopy is really thick. And so that's not something that doesn't happen, you know. It's like this canopy is thick enough that if we have a running crown fire, it won't matter necessarily that we've burned up the surface fuels if we have a fire that's purely driven by wind that hits this area with some momentum. See, we've got trees in here that are dead from beetle kill and also trees that have been killed by the firing operation. And so there's that scenario where, you know, if we have a run out in here, it's nice that they're kind of getting down to the bottom of this gully. But if you had a fire, if the fire crosses a slope here and kind of pushes up this gully with a whole bunch of momentum and it burned into an area of thick trees in here, like you can kind of see there's patches of thick trees. You know, it's not out of the question that you could get fired that would hop through the crowns through your firing operation. So that's why you want depth on your firing. You know, and that's why we, and you look for more depth in places where you expect to get pushed by the topography. For those who explore these deep, and that was from Farah McDade Ting about the reburn. For those who explore the canyons, any thoughts on what you do if you're caught in there? If a fire broke out, do you think you could get in the river, or is it possible to survive? As Lost Sierra, and they donated $10. Thank you. Yeah, I think about that. I think about that when I'm out hiking and it's really hot. I guess that's a good reason to avoid hiking when it's 105 degrees, or hiking in places, you know. But I guess you get, like when I'm out working in active fire zones, you think about that all day long, right? Like when I was out today, up towards the top, I was meeting with the Forest Service guys, you know, somewhere right out in here. And then out in the distance, we heard this awesome freight train roar. And that was, you know, maybe this fire running here. It was a sound of a not too far off crown fire. And so, yeah, it's like you think about that all day long when you're working around active fires. So to me, like, I guess it's not out of the ordinary. When I'm on the landscape in general, I'm always kind of like thinking about it. Indigo, Vance, Eyebright, the timber company, Eyebright. Timber companies are replanting with pine trees. Yeah, some places they are. Some places with Douglas fir. Some places they're even planting giant sequoia. How's Forest Hill tonight? When I drove through at 4 o'clock, it was really windy. Wendell McCullough. It looked good. We haven't showed zoomed in shots of where the damage was, and that's kind of by design. I don't really want to. I know people who live there want to know. I don't really want to zoom in far enough that like you can see which houses burned, because I don't know how accurate this mapping line is, and like there's 2 different lines here that were flown, and it's not clear to me which one's better. And so just as kind of a matter of course for us, without having people on the ground and vetting that intel, we're not going to like zoom in and say like who's on what side of the line. What is clear though is that the fire all through Forest Hill did not cross the road, and it did not burn. They saved a lot of structures. So when I drove through there today, I didn't see very many burnt structures, and things were pretty. You could tell like things were kind of relaxed, and you could tell that people had a lot of work that they've been doing over the last 24 hours. Funnel Junkyards donated $10. I don't know about anyone else out there, but I love junkyards. The only thing I don't love is personal junkyards that burn. I saw firefighters on the live video from KCRA yesterday trying to put out fires in a junkyard. Someone's logging operation yard right there in Forest Hill, and that's bullshit. Like, wildland firefighters don't wear CBAs. So you look on the webcam, you look on this cam, and you see these dudes out there with a fire hose with no breathing protection, trying to put out a junkyard. It's like that's just. It's a good reason to not have a personal junkyard. I love. Oh, someone says no junkyard talk. Okay. Junkyards, logging yards, splitting hairs. But I saw a lot of, you see a lot of junk burning, and wildland firefighters die of cancer like crazy. So let's clean up our junk. The woods aren't a junkyard; they aren't a dump. Anyway, I like your handle, Funnel Junkyards. Post interview videos, I will, but I'm going to edit them. Mary Pioneers, Christina donated $100. Said they went through the Dixie Fire with us. Why am I describing the American Fire burning mainly as hot or something like that? Less than a quarter of the acreage burned at high severity, and the rest was low to moderate. Well, the parts that I was describing did burn hot. All these places you see brush out there, like that's a lot of hot burn. So I respect your data, but the people I was talking to today, they told me that it was a higher proportion than that. But yeah, if you got data that says that. But I guess it did burn hot. I didn't say that it all burned hot. Less than a quarter burned at high severity. All right. Well, the part I saw was pretty hot. Thanks for the question, Doug. Flames visible on Forest Hill camera. All right. Mary Pioneers. Prescribed burn in Forest Hill. 400 acres. I saw some of that along the road. I don't know if the fire burned on that or not. Was there a shelter deployment during the King Fire? I'm not sure. There was a crew that got trapped. Tommy asked about that. And they had to hike out and barely got out of there. Inmate crew. How do you give them access to the roads? I'm not sure what that question means, Kimberly. Do I like crows? Yeah, I do. I like ravens too. Looking at the fire and watch duty and turn on VERS hotspots. We've talked about that quite a bit. VERS, we don't use that stuff as much. If we can handle it, I'll turn them on here if we got them loaded. VERS is a heat sensing satellite that flies way up high in space. And so you end up getting these dots out here, and then people freak out because they think that there's this, and oftentimes they're not accurate. Oftentimes, it's the satellite is out, over Utah or something, and they're picking up heat over here and projecting it. So, especially when fires are really running, these dots. The reason they put a 1 kilometer square around them is that they can be off by a kilometer. VERS can be off by there's 375 meter pixels. So I don't use them for anything tactical. And I'm going to turn them off so someone doesn't come in late and think we're saying that there's a fire. What do you believe the forecast for the next several days means for eastern flank? And will Katie Alvarez asking if more resources will be moved to the east? I don't know, because I feel like it's not clear that more resources can do anything except prepare a big box, right? So the big box at this point seems like it's probably going to be out through the American fire and then down this side of the King fire and try to kind of keep it contained in that box. So if there's resources moving out, they're going to be moving out to prep for that box. But I don't know, as long as, if the rain comes in and is helpful, then they might try to get more aggressive. But if you look at this fire here, how it's spotted, over a quarter mile this afternoon and how it ran a mile this afternoon, there's not a lot tactically that we can do to stop the fire out in here. Someone posted a great picture. So this is like 20 hours of spread, mile and a half. I really like Google Earth because there's some cool tools in here. Like you can, I can draw a line across here. And then I can show an elevation profile of that, right? So it's a little exaggerated, but obviously it's a little exaggerated, but it shows you that if we follow that line, like this is 51% slope, this is 65% slope. You just see that we've got all these big canyons out there, and we can run bulldozers up to like, maybe 50% slope max, but more likely, 30% is pretty steep. So as you come across this line, you just see that we've got all these deep, gnarly canyons, and we just can't really fight fire safely. And so just say, you wanted to put a fire line across that transect, like that's what you'd be dealing with. And we just don't put firefighters into the ground like that because it's easy to kill them or, break them. And we try not to do that. So right now they're prepping this road through the burn with mastigators, and they'll be doing more prep along, the perimeter of their future comp box. But they're not going to really, they're not going to contain this edge of the fire anytime soon, just because there's no real topographic opportunities to do that. If you look at the country where this fire is burning, we're not going to, we can't drive dozers down into here. And we really don't like to commit a crew down in the bottom of this hole where it takes, an hour for a marathon runner to hike up out of there when you could have a fire that blows up, spots in here and blows up. Oh, sorry. I'm not showing the map. All right. That means it's time to go to bed. Thanks for the reminders. If I'm leaving you hanging on the questions, sorry, but I'm toast. Thanks for the donations, Adam Smith, Kurt Burrow, John Pace Beck. We appreciate the donations. And also you can donate on our website. Do I think the fire reached Tahoe? Blah, blah, blah. I can't do it. Sorry. Yeah, I see. They can't see the map. Now they can. Okay. Thanks, y'all. Got to go to bed. Catch you later.